Okay. Hello, everyone. This is J.D. Seal, and I'm Vice President at Skyview Partners, and I want to thank you for joining us today for our session on defining and determining risk to data presented by Carol Woodbury. We're also going to have a very special guest with us, Skyview CEO John Vanderwall, after Carol's presentation. Carol, this morning we'll talk about the definition of risk to data, and we'll discuss how to determine the level of risk to the data on your IBM I systems. Excuse me. This session will build on the last two Coffee with Carol webinars where Carol discussed reducing risk to data by examining best practices and implementing multiple layers of defense. If you've missed those, both of those are available on our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/user/SkyviewPartners1. So I hope you get to catch up with those. Today's session is sponsored by Skyview Partners, and we're happy to have you. Skyview Partners delivers security administration and compliance reporting solutions for IBM I, AIX, and Linux, and the key word here is solutions. Our goal is to draw on the unparalleled expertise of our team of experts led by Carol Woodbury to consult with and provide answers to our customers in order to help them automate mundane administrative tasks, compliance reporting, and basically improve their security. Carol Woodbury is the co-founder, president, and CTO of Skyview Partners. Prior to forming Skyview, Carol spent 16 plus years at IBM in positions including Chief Engineering Manager and Security Architect for IBM's iSeries Security Group. Carol is also the author of the book IBM I Security, Administration, and Compliance, available on mcpress.com. And I've got the wrong book on there, don't I? So she has a newer book also available on mcpress.com. Skyview Partners solutions include managed services. This is our new offering. We're getting a lot of positive response from our clients, and I encourage you to take a look at this if you haven't seen it already. Monthly service where critical security administration topics are monitored and you're notified if something needs attention. So we gather the reports regularly, and they're emailed to Skyview, and issues are discovered, you're notified. We also continue to offer our security checkups for IBM I and open systems and security improvement services. Skyview Partners also has various software offerings, including our Risk Assessor software, which is our vulnerability assessment, Skyview Policy Minder, Skyview Policy Minder, which is our security administration tool, Skyview Audit Journal Reporter, which are predefined auditor-ready reports, as well as Policy Minder for open systems. And keep in mind that all Skyview Partners software is available in an unlimited software license. So with that, I want to start our session on defining and determining risk to data presented by Carol and turn the session over to today's presenter, Carol Woodbury. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning, everyone. Here we go. Show my screen there.
There you
Hey,
go.
Thanks for joining me this morning, and thanks to JD for that introduction. And as he said, I'm going to be talking about defining and determining risk to data. So again, it builds off the previous two Coffee with Carol sessions. If you haven't listened to those, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to those at some point. Just go to our website and hit the YouTube icon on the left-hand nav bar, and it will take you directly to our channel. All right, so how is risk defined? What am I talking about when I say risk to data? So in defining risk, I went to Merriam-Webster, and that dictionary said that it is the possibility that something bad or unpleasant will happen. Well, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That we talk about risk in terms of that. So if we are talking about it in terms of data, okay, what does that mean? The possibility that something bad or unpleasant will happen. Okay, so if we think about bad things for data, one thing would be the data is unavailable. How can that happen in the context of security? How can that happen? Well, it could be accidentally or purposefully deleted. All right, and that would happen because people have too much authority. Another bad thing that could happen is that data would be unknowingly not accurate, knowingly not accurate, or has the potential to be inaccurate. So how does that happen? Well, if people have change authority to a file, they would be able to modify it. So what if somebody went in, and I know this would never happen, but in theory, maybe a programmer goes in to make a change that was supposed to happen and wrote the wrong SQL statement, or actually meant to test that SQL statement against test data and didn't have the library list correct, and modified production data. That, like I say, would never happen, but in theory, actually I've seen that happen. And another thing I've seen happen is that files get uploaded instead of being downloaded, just accidentally hitting the wrong button in the Excel spreadsheet. Another place that data will often be accidentally modified is when the development exists on the same system as the production. And that's just, to me, an accident waiting to happen, because there's so many opportunities for that library list to be wrong, or to just simply go after the wrong piece of data, or not library qualify something and go after the production data. So another bad thing that can happen is that data is read inappropriately. Does that happen? Well, somebody with use authority to a file can read the contents. But if you think of something that contains data that is under compliance regulations, like healthcare information, the data may need to be denied by default, not be able to be read by anybody. So there can be problems there. It can also happen if somebody has access to data, but maybe has access to too many fields in a database file and is able to read private data when they should only be able to read part of the data. That often happens in HR databases. HR databases lot of different types of information, and it's typically mixed information, meaning publicly available information and private information. So often if somebody is reading a database file, they only need that public information but actually have access to read the private information. And sometimes curiosity gets the better of people and they go in and read data that they shouldn't. So I think you would probably agree with me that all of these things constitute bad things in the context of how it applies to data. So when going through this exercise of determining risk to the data on your system, the one thing that I have to emphasize is that you must be realistic. So the thought process of IBM I is secure, I don't have to worry about this topic, well, you're probably not listening to this webinar for one thing, but it is so absolutely not true that I just can't emphasize enough that you have to get out of that mindset. IBM I is secure-able, but you have to use the tools and the features that are provided by it to have a secure system. So let's step through the data and the process of determining risk to the data on your system. Being realistic and realizing that there may be risks on your system. So I'd like you to start with the assumption that data is at risk. And if you go through this exercise and prove that the data is not at risk, that is awesome. And obviously that's the place you want to get to if you're not there already. So you assume one thing, you assume that there is risk to the data, and at the end you either have the list of the things that you need to modify to reduce the risk to the data, or you have just proven yourself wrong and there is no risk to the data, or the risk to the data is at an acceptable level for your organization. So how do you know whether your data is at risk or not? I've said for a long time, security begins with an assessment, okay? And obviously, if you read any of the security literature or the guidance out there, this is what they're promoting to know whether you have issues and vulnerabilities within a network, on your servers, and so forth. And the guidance also says that it should be done by a neutral third party because they don't come in with any kind of predefined how something should work or how it should be configured or whether it is working or not. And that's the problem with doing one of these yourself. Doing one yourself is better than nothing. You're probably going to look at things with jaded eyes, assuming that things are working, maybe not testing them as well as you should. There are also probably things that you just don't know to look for. So I am going to say that security begins with an assessment and highly recommend that you seek an outside source to do that, so you get that thorough assessment. And what I've said to this point is true for all data on all of your servers throughout your organization, not just IBM I. So as you think about risk to data, it's not just data. What we're talking about today can apply not just to the data on your IBM I, but if you're thinking about your organization and you want to protect your organization, you're actually going to be thinking about that risk as it pertains throughout your organization and not just IBM I. So this advice goes just beyond IBM I. Okay, so once you have that assessment, the assessment's going to come back and it's going to identify gaps or it's going to identify vulnerabilities. So what you want to do is prioritize that list by the risk posed to the data. So our security checkup service, that's why our security checkup service, when we discuss with our clients, is listed out in high, medium, and low risk items, and it has everything to do with making sure people understand the highest risk to the data. So you prioritize the list by the risk that is posed to the data, and then you want to look at the threat of the risk occurring in your organization. So for example, if there is a risk that is listed that your service tool IDs have never been changed. Okay, that is a vulnerability, but it's a pretty low risk vulnerability. If somebody has to know about service tools, somebody has to be able to get to a command line. They might not necessarily know about the default service tool IDs or even know to look in a manual for default service tool IDs. So that risk is going to be greater than having, for example, the QSEC offer user profile have a default never changing password. So you're going to want to prioritize the list, okay? And again, I'm encouraging you to be realistic. I really have to put this out there and say you can't assume that a risk doesn't exist in your organization. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard people say, oh, my users don't know how to do that. They'd never be able to do that, so I'm just not going to worry about that. And to that I say, have you hired anybody under the age of 50? Because, you know, growing up, I remember the time that I started to learn about computers, and those people that grew up with computers as a course of their coming through grade school and at home aren't all that much younger than I am. So if you have hired anybody recently that is, I'll say, 50 or younger, people know how to get at data. If you think that people don't know that there are ODBC drivers out there that are freeware that can be downloaded and get to database files, you truly are like this picture with your head in the sand. So I would just encourage you to step back and just take a very neutral position and say, okay, well, if this can happen in my organization, what is the risk of it, and what can they do if something is identified as a vulnerability? Okay, so be realistic about the actual threat to the data. So I've talked about data. Well, what data am I talking about? So what you want to do is take a look, and it's typically by application. I mean, if you think about the types of applications that you have running on your system, you can pretty well lay out the type of data that your organization is retaining on your IBM I or other servers. So if you have an HR package that you're running off of IBM I, you probably have some private data under that salary information. If you are in any way related to a healthcare organization or have a retail organization that has a pharmacy or optical department or something like that, then you have regulated data. If you're taking credit cards, you have obviously regulated data through PCI. And then don't forget the type of company confidential information, things like pricing information. Your suppliers may be very confidential, and what makes your business a success. Maybe it's your sales information or your future plans. Okay, so all of that could be company confidential. So if you start to lay out the type of information that you have on your system, then you can start analyzing the risk to the data. And what you want to do is to identify the risk to the data that would have the worst ramifications if something bad happened to it. So if you go back to the healthcare information where people's treatment plans or their healthcare information would be released, if that was lost or stolen somehow, what would the ramifications be? Or maybe you don't have regulated data or private data, maybe you have only company confidential data. Then you have to start thinking about, well, what if somebody modified our inventory levels, either accidentally or purposefully? What's the ramification to our organization should that occur? So just kind of walk through the various scenarios given the data on your system. And the place that you want to start is on the data where the ramifications would be the worst. So when you start and look at the organization, what are you going to look at? Well, to assess the risk across your organization, you're going to look at any server or device containing that production information, confidential information, or private data. So when you think about a lot of the data that is on your system today, the system of record may be IBM I, but it may have been taken out to a file share on your network. It may be downloadable to people's desktops. It may actually be in spreadsheets. It may be on mobile devices. That's why I say you have to look at the risk to the data across the organization. And then when you're looking at the risk and assessing the risk on a specific server or device, you have to look at the access control settings of the data on that device or server. You have to look at the user account privileges, and I would suggest that you have to look at the encryption requirements, because if you've got regulated data, a lot of times that comes with encryption requirements. So you need to look at the encryption requirements not just on IBM I, but you would want to look and make sure it was still encrypted when it got downloaded into that spreadsheet and so forth. So let's look at an example. So we have an HR application that's running on IBM I. There are several of those out there. And so what you would want to start looking at to assess the risk is the authorities on the database files themselves. So there are studies out there that look at authorities to libraries. I, quite frankly, don't care about authorities to libraries. Authorities to the database files themselves, because most of the time if somebody is running an application, not most of the time, when somebody runs an application, to be able to get to the data inside, they have to get to the library. So you can set it to public exclude, but then you'll have to grant back everybody's authority to that library. So what makes sense is to secure the data itself. Okay, so when I'm looking at that, I would start looking at who can access the data. So under that context, you're going to look at users and groups with all object, right, because they can access everything. Then you would look at whether the users of the application are a member of the profile that owns the application, because they have, in essence, all authorities to the application. And then you would definitely look at the access control settings on the database files themselves, the public authority and the private authorities, if it's secured with an authorization list and so forth. So all that taken together will constitute the risk to the data from an authority point of view. And then you want to look at where all does that data reside, because it's often the case, even if development and production are separated, I often see cases where there are developer libraries on production, maybe to facilitate debugging, and I will often see where a production database file has been copied into a developer library, or even a production database file copied into a production library, probably as a backup, so that if they are making changes, they can roll back their changes and that type of thing. But often when that copy is made, the authorities are not the same as what it is in production. So you have to find all those instances. The other place is other servers. So if you are using production data on your UAT systems, your test systems, or your development servers, the data may be in a data warehouse or on a shared drive and spreadsheets. So to look at the risk to the data in the entire context, you have to look at where all it resides. And then you start looking at other vulnerabilities. Okay, so we looked at the data itself and where it is, but then you start looking at other attributes of the server, other security attributes of the server, and those sort of things will give you an idea of how easily somebody could get onto the system, either, again, purposefully with evil intent or just to try to do something clever. So you're looking at things like the password rules, and the default passwords, and inactivity timeout, and certainly the security level and so forth. So this is the type of exercise you go through to determine risk to your data on IBM I. So as you decide, again, you've gone through a security assessment and you've assessed the risk to specific sets of data on IBM I. So again, when assessing the risk, what you're going to look at is the risk level, because again, what we're trying to get to is what needs to be addressed first, or what needs to have some plans put in place so that you can reduce the risk level to an acceptable level. So the risk will rise when production servers are affected. Okay, so for example, if you only have default passwords on your unit test system, your user acceptance test system, or developer system, that's going to be less of a risk than if default passwords are prolific on your production server, primarily because there are fewer users that can even get to or know about those user acceptance tests or development systems. So just from a sheer volume and percent of being able to access the system, it's going to be a less risk when it's only on the non-production servers, the test systems, for example. The risk level, so it is a greater risk when it's on production. So it's also a greater risk when the same issue exists on multiple servers. So again, if you take the idea of default passwords, if default passwords are prolific and exist everywhere throughout the IBM I servers, it is likely that somebody can guess a password or realize that a default password exists on production. They may try it everywhere. So again, the more systems that are affected, the higher the risk level. The risk level will also increase as the number of vulnerabilities increase. So for example, you have profiles with default non-expiring profiles with all object and many inactive profiles that are enabled. Okay, all of those things existing on one server certainly raises the risk level than if you just have profiles with default passwords. Okay, so the more vulnerabilities you kind of pile on, the greater risk level you're going to have. And obviously, if all of those issues exist across all of your servers, then of course the risk level increases as well. Okay, so hopefully you get the understanding of how you start to determine, again, the risk level to your organization and to that data specifically. So how do you determine what steps to take? Well, the most obvious answer is that, well, you want to take action against what is going to cause or is causing the biggest risk to the data and will get me the biggest risk reduction. And while that's true, and you definitely want to put plans in place to address that, it may take time if it's a complicated issue. If you decide that the biggest risk is the fact that your application users all have all object and the public authority of your database files is all, that may take a little bit of time to unwind or to do something about it to protect that data. So yes, you want to put some plans in place to address that issue, but I would encourage you to also look at the things that may be easy to address, that you might be able to get a quick reduction in risk. Let's look at those default passwords. You can just have a policy in place and you can change the command default so that you no longer create profiles with default passwords. And that would be a quick win to remove risk to that data because the default passwords no longer exist. So kind of that, we call it low-hanging fruit, that thing that is just something very simple and easy to do, because remember, anything that you do reduces risk to the data. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing or the optimal thing that reduces risk to data. Any step you take to reduce or eliminate a vulnerability reduces the risk to the data, and you are making progress at that point. So last time, last Coffee with Carol, I talked about the multiple layers of defense. And so these are the options that you are probably going to look at when putting things in place to reduce the risk to your organization. So again, I just want to bring back that concept of multiple layers of defense. And the greater risk to the data, probably, and the less risk averse to the data, more than likely the more multiple layers of defense you're going to put into place. But that's fully explained in last Coffee with Carol. But again, what I really just want to encourage you is to start somewhere. Again, yes, do you want to get to the ultimate? Yeah, that is my dream for you, and certainly what you want to get to. But anything that you do, I just encourage you to start, because anything that you do is a reduction in the risk. And so the goal is to reduce risk. Let's just start and do something. So that's it for this week's Coffee with Carol, and I would like to encourage you to join us next month, because I'm going to talk about the top 10 vulnerabilities of IBM I security configurations, and that registration is already available. I'm sure it will be in the link that you get for the email that you'll get coming out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my business partner, John Vanderwall, and he has a special message.
Thanks, Carol. I wanted to spend a few moments talking with you about our newest offering. It's Skyview Managed Security Services. This new service includes ongoing services and all the tools required to accomplish the tasks that are involved. So let me describe a little of how our managed security service works. The first thing we do is a risk assessment. Carol has talked a lot about the need to do a risk assessment today. A risk assessment is the foundation. From here we learn the things that we want to monitor and areas we might be able to help you with. In our most basic version of managed security services, we monitor 10 key security indicators for you. The information is sent to us, we analyze it, we look for the exceptions. We send you exception reports, and you can choose to address the issue as you see fit. If there are no exceptions, we let you know that you're good to go. If you choose more than our basic version of managed security services, we work together from the assessment results, choosing areas to help you slowly improve security over time. The idea is to make progress. We aren't advocating changing everything all at once, rather making incremental progress in improving security by tackling discrete projects over an extended period of time. As you might have guessed, there is a price difference. We have two levels: basic, where we monitor and alert you to issues that you then address as you see fit, or the more advanced, where we monitor and help you improve the security over time. I encourage you to contact Skyview Partners to learn more about our managed security services and the pricing models in place. As you can see on your screen, JD has the page from our website up, and you can learn more there. And then I would encourage you to fill out the Contact Us form if you're interested, and we can give you a little bit more detail as to how this all works. So thank you for this opportunity to tell you about this new offering from Skyview. And JD, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Carol. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's session. We are happy to have you join us, and hopefully you got some information out of it. Again, if you have questions, you can contact us at our website, skyviewpartners.com, or for faster service, you can give us a call. We're happy to work with you. Thank you. That will conclude today's session.